in.
More coming in.
More coming in right now. I would recommend logging in. We got about 200 folks in right now. We are sharing our webcam, so actually a separate camera. You're welcome to view that. That might depend on how quick your internet bandwidth is. But we're going to start real quickly. I'll go ahead and tell you guys, I'd recommend if you want to get some questions in, plug them in now. You can just plug them into the question section of GoToWebinar. And then we'll start first with a quick introduction of ourselves. We'll try and be brief because we see we have a ton of questions already. So Brian, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name is Brian Knight. I'm the founder of Pragmatic Works. We, of course, specialize in everything around BI. So we do training and consulting around business intelligence. So Power BI being one of our major things.
Yeah. My name is Devin Knight. I'm the training director here at Pragmatic Works. So focus on any application of how we do training here. So whether it's private on-site training where we come on-site and help you, or whether it's that we do our really popular on-demand training platform, that's really where we focus on. And then we have Mitchell Pearson.
Hey, good afternoon. My name is Mitchell Pearson. I am the training content manager. I work directly with Brian and Devin here at Pragmatic Works. And so my job is specifically revolves around delivering training as well as developing new training courses here at Pragmatic Works.
Great. All right, so hopefully you guys can hear us all fine. Seems like you guys are hearing us okay.
We can.
What we're gonna get a ton of questions. One we're gonna start off with that we have, Crystal actually got some questions ahead of time from you guys as well. Several of you folks actually sent us some in advance. And what we're gonna try and do is I'll probably, as I kind of MC this, direct these questions to one person, and then the rest of us will chime in to be able to add to them. So the first question that we have is about kind of a bigger picture thing. Microsoft has this big conference that's coming up in just a couple weeks. I think it's in 2 weeks, called the Microsoft Business Application Summit. And so the first question we have is really kind of a high level one, detailing and asking, well, what is the business application platform? What is this kind of high level thing, and what components are built into it? How does it relate to Power BI? Because we're seeing a lot of interest in that from a Power BI perspective. So I'll address this one first here, and then we'll get into our next one. So the Microsoft Business Application Platform is a combination of tools. It's tools that come from Power BI is included, Power Apps is included, and also a tool called Microsoft Flow. Real briefly what these are, many of you know at least somewhat familiar with what Power BI is, so I won't go too much in depth into that. Power Apps is a line of business application tool for rapid application development. So it's really designed for being able to develop apps very quickly and with very low code. Oftentimes you'll hear people call it a no-code application, but really there's a little bit of code and formulas that you can design, so like Excel formulas.
How's the learning curve on that one?
It's pretty quick, actually.
Yeah.
So the learning curve on Power Apps, I'm actually loving it. It's a really cool tool to be able to build these small little applications that are within your organization.
Works on the phone too, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, you can develop whatever you develop immediately shows up on your phone when you share it with individuals. And then the last piece is Microsoft Flow. And Flow is really kind of a workflow application. These are all services, by the way, that are in the cloud. So none of it is necessarily things that you would install locally. There used to be a Power Apps studio for your desktop. They actually are recommending you don't even use that anymore because they have all the features that you can design from the web browser. But Microsoft Flow is also another cloud service that's basically a workflow application. So I can have something like, one that I actually personally use is whenever a certain blog posts a blog post, I want to tweet it. And I have a little review step where I can review and say, oh, do I really want to tweet that? Or is it something that is a little risque? Maybe I'll decline that one, kind of thing.
And it's kind of like Zapier is.
Yeah.
If you're familiar with Zapier, or if then else in a little bit of a
Yep.
way. We use it internally for things like, hey, when a chat comes in through a support channel, it will then copy that chat over to Salesforce.com or our CRM in our case.
Yeah.
So it has all those kind of connectors all built in.
Yeah, so all three of these tools really work together. You use Flow oftentimes with inside Power Apps to be able to initiate workflows. So I need to have some kind of approval for a expense report that was turned in or an expense that was turned in. Then that would initiate a flow from the Power App, and then you can use Power BI to be able to report on all these items. Real quickly, for you to add in, I know you've been exploring this some lately. These are all these three tools, Power Apps, Microsoft Flow, and Power BI, are all part of this business application platform. There's also another service in the cloud that's similar to Microsoft Flow called Logic Apps, right? And you've been exploring this one a little bit. How's that different? Why would you choose one versus the other kind of thing?
Logic Apps appear to be very similar to Power Apps, but
Flow.
Or Microsoft Flow, but much more applicable for Azure platform as a whole.
Okay.
Whereas Power Apps and Microsoft Flow really tie in a lot better with Power BI in general. So if I was just doing Power BI, I would focus on Power Apps and Microsoft Flow. But if I'm kind of integrating and moving towards Azure as a whole, then I would definitely want to learn Logic Apps. But they have a lot of similarities between the two.
So Logic Apps sounds like it's more for the enterprise,
Correct.
whereas Flow can be used more by individuals and business analysts and business users kind of thing.
Exactly.
And it's also more integrated into SharePoint, the Office platform versus the Azure platform. So it's kind of a differentiator.
Cool. Well, I'll direct this one to you, Brian, since we're talking about the cloud. So the individual here, Jenna, that gave us a question. Last one was by Chuck, by the way. Jenna asks, I can't use Microsoft Cloud. So for whatever reason, their company has decided that whether it's Microsoft Cloud or any cloud, they're not going to cloud right now.
They got to be on premise.
They got to be on premises. So they want to know, is there still a method of how they can do Power BI?
Yeah, so if you can't go to the cloud, let's imagine you're a hospital and you have HIPAA concerns, even though there is a HIPAA version of the cloud that's HIPAA compliant, there is a Power BI server, and you can download that from the Power BI website also. The Power BI server resembles reporting services, except it can host reporting services reports, it can host the gauges and all the KPIs and the mobile reports. On top of that, it also can host Power BI reports as well, PBIX files. You can either publish it with a special version of Power BI Desktop, so you'd have to use the Power BI Desktop that's made specifically for Power BI Server. If you don't, you might use a feature that is available in the new version of Power BI Desktop, but not available on the server, because they're only incrementing that Power BI server about once every few months versus every month, or every day almost in some cases. So be careful. You may keep those when you hit start and you type in Power BI, you'll actually see Power BI Desktop. You'll see Power BI Desktop twice. One is your Power BI server version of it, and one is the main version of it.
And I've seen some companies that are actually doing both. They'll have a use case where there's some data they can get into the cloud and they can take advantage of some of the newer features. Keep in mind the preview features in Power BI are not available in the Power BI report server. So things like some of the drill through features that have come out fairly recently came out after the last release of the Power BI report server. But some people are actually doing a hybrid approach. Well, they will put some of the data that is okay to put in the cloud according to their standards in the Power BI service, and then for everything else, still use the Power BI report server. So.
Yeah, and you still can use things like you can still view them online. You can still do those kind of things. A little tricky sometimes to do that, but you can. There's a lot of neat features inside there that are not available in the other flavors. So yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
We have some customers that are putting their accounting information in the cloud, and then their HIPAA information, even though it is certified for HIPAA, they're putting some HIPAA data on the premise. All right.
This next one's kind of for all of us. This one's from Kyle. I think this is someone that might be following my blog series I do here. It's kind of a general question. What is your favorite custom visual? So there's a lot of custom visuals out there. There's last I checked, there's more than 150 custom visuals out there.
They're awesome.
They're really cool things. Which are some of your favorites, I guess, because you have different use cases on why you might use one or another.
So I have one favorite I'll talk about now, but one of the great things about the custom visuals is it helps Microsoft keep up with things like Tableau and actually even pass it in some cases.
Yeah.
My favorite one, and Devin's opening up, looks like the Power BI gallery right now, looks like. A custom visual gallery. So this is where you're sharing your screen looks like, and you can see a list of all those, and it's actually integrated into Power BI also. My favorite one that I use on a regular basis as a consumer, and that I also use as a developer as well, is the calendar control. Now, not the regular calendar control. There's a whole bunch of them out there. I prefer the custom calendar control by Aquarium, I think that's how I pronounce it, because it allows you to do multiple months. There is another good one out there also that has like heat maps on the calendar. But what you're actually going to see when you use a calendar control is the ability to see a calendar and then put numbers on top of the calendar. So what are my profit margins, or my sales by day? And each of those days becomes a slicer also. So if I select a day, then every other control on my report will also change as well. That's one of my favorite ones, and that has the Apple one also makes a great bubble chart.
Yeah, the bubble chart looks like a hierarchy chart. What I was going to try and bring up here real quickly is so they can see the calendar you're talking about.
It's under time if you see.
There it is.
There it is.
Yeah, so custom calendar by Aquarium. The cool thing about that one too is I think you can even display multiple measures on it. I think that's a really interesting one. The other calendars are pretty good too. There's a lot of good ones out there.
Yeah, there are. The other one I like a lot on the time one is called the BeyondSoft calendar. That one's more of a heat map for the calendar. So, but it has some limitations on it, but it's pretty slick. It's very obvious.
Right.
How about yours?
I'll give you.
Oh, my turn. So I think one of my favorites, and it's usually a crowd favorite when I'm teaching class for Power BI as well, is it's called the Aquarium.
Oh, you
Oh,
went there.
no,
Come
he did
on.
The Aquarium, really cool one. It was one of the first ones to come out, I think. And so it's little fish that are floating around and swimming back and forth in this little aquarium, and the size of the fish essentially will tell you how well different areas are doing. And so you can actually change the shape of them as well. So it can be just a regular fish, like a rounded or a triangle. You can also set them up as sharks. But one of the coolest features that not everybody knows about is that if you actually don't make goal or you go negative, the fish will actually flip upside down as if it had died, and it will float to the top. It will float to the top. And so that is a crowd favorite.
You don't want to be the sales guy comes in the morning and sees your report, and your guy floating at the top.
Yeah.
Your name is dead.
It's not a good thing if you're floating at the top every day.
Yeah.
That's for sure. But that's
Wow,
one
and
of my
it's a
favorites.
5-star one also.
It's a crowd favorite. Everybody likes the
popular.
Aquarium. Absolutely.
So I've been showing, I'll tell you mine here in a moment as well. I've been showing this from the AppSource website, which you can go to if you go to store.office.com. That's the way you can get there. Many of you already realize this, but you can also find these custom visuals from within inside of Power BI desktop itself. So if I were to flip over to the Power BI desktop and go up to the top ribbon here, I don't have any data in here at all, but if I go up to the very top where it says from Marketplace underneath the custom visual section, I can also search for and find all those custom visuals directly from inside of the Marketplace, and I can add them into my interface right away.
And the cool thing is, if you add it to your report here, it automatically works online on the mobile devices and all that. So it's seamless across all the platforms.
Worth mentioning here as well, since we're here, is one of the things that's fairly new is you can also enable my organization visuals. So the idea here is you can actually have some of the custom visuals, or maybe even some custom visuals that you developed internally in-house, and you can share those with everyone in your organization through the admin portal inside the Power BI service. We actually think we have a question later that'll lead us towards that admin portal anyways, but you can create either your own custom visuals or download the existing custom visuals and make them kind of these approved organization ones. So that's up here in the top here as well. So a couple of my favorites, I have a bunch. If you don't know, I blog on a lot of these custom visuals. I like weekly. I'll show you that here in a moment, but I like the infographic designer. I think is a cool one. So the infographic designer is a really cool one.
This one.
Yep. So that one allows you to actually take images and change. You're seeing what look like buildings here. That's actually a column chart. That the columns in the column chart have been replaced with a graphic image, which is really cool. I like the Synoptic Panel a lot by OKViz. That's the SQL BI guys.
Good one.
Yeah, it's a really flexible. Allows you to do a lot of really cool things.
Gotta spell it right though.
It's on the first page there also.
Is it? Okay. Yeah. It's not on there for me. Anyways, so the Synoptic Panel is a cool one. What the Synoptic Panel will do is that will allow you to actually bring in you can place an image. So you use their website. They allow you to use it for free on their website. You can upload an image to their website, and then you can actually plot out points on that image. So kind of think of like a floor plan you have. There it is. Oh, there's the perfect example. So I have a floor plan that I want to upload onto this website, and it's going to output this map, basically a mapping image that will map my data to that image. And then that way I can kind of tie in data I have in my data set to the image and have it light up in different ways. So it's a really cool one.
Yeah, we're using this at the Sheriff's Department here in town to light up a prison and show the different incidences per cell in the prison or per beat for an officer. That one's a really cool one for like any kind of storefronts or retail or hospitals. I mean, it's got a lot of good stuff in there.
That one's cool. I'll mention a couple other ones real briefly so we can move on to the next question. But Sandance, I really like that one. Oh, I guess there's no extra D there maybe. Or maybe it's 2 words. Let's try it again. No, it's just not finding it. Well, Sandance.
Or change it over to all.
Oh, okay.
There, it's real.
Oh, I was filtered.
Yep.
There it is. Okay, so Sandance is a cool one where basically it'll show a point for all the values that you have. Looks like it's not rated super well there. And it will take the values that you have and it can show them as a dot, then it can show them as a map, then it can show them as a column chart or bar chart, and it can change things really cool. That's a cool one. I also like the Power Apps. Oh, sorry, you want to say that?
It's a little tough to configure. That's why it's rated so poorly.
It is a little bit, yeah. There's a lot of features to twist and turn in there to make it work. I also like the Power Apps custom visual. We've been talking about Power Apps, and the timeline storyteller is really cool.
What is Power Apps? Okay, so what is the Power Apps custom visual used for?
Yeah, so
amazing. Yeah.
The cool thing about the Power Apps custom visual is this gives you the capability of doing something that if you come from a more traditional BI background, something called write back. So some of you might be familiar with this concept where basically it was an analysis services thing you could do where you could actually key in data into an Excel spreadsheet and it push it back to the data source. Well, that's kind of what you can do with Power Apps. So you can have a Power App that you've designed that writes data back to the data source. You can then embed that Power App in your Power BI report, key in information, and not only see it be pushed back to the data source, but you'll also see it appear in other report visuals you have immediately. So there's some really cool thing, and it depends on what your data source is. Does it need to be refreshed and things like that, but it's really cool.
What I love about the Power Apps one is it also creates the ability to have actionable BI.
Yeah.
So if you see a problem where a salesperson is doing X, Y, and Z, or an order looks erroneous,
right?
You can hit a button in Power Apps to go ahead and kick off an investigation workflow or whatnot. Before
we move on to the next question, just to point out to you, just a shameless plug here. If you go to my personal blog, actually it's on our corporate blog as well. If you go to devinknight.com, I blog, it looks like 110 weeks I've blogged about these custom visuals. So there's a ton of free stuff, and every one of these, basically the reason why I did this blog series is because they're great. The custom visuals are really cool, but nobody tells you how to use them. So I've been doing this blog series with videos to show you how to actually interact with and use the custom visuals. All right, next one I have for you. You're my DAX master, Mitchell. So we'll start with you on this one. Is the question? I know what they're asking, and maybe you can kind of interpret the question better.
Okay.
But the question is kind of, why are my totals off in my visuals? So what they're saying is the sum of the values that they see in like a table, for example, don't match up with the sum that shows up on the very bottom of the table. So like the total on the bottom doesn't match what the values show in between.
Yeah, that's a great question. It's actually a really common question. So where a lot of people like DAX is that DAX is super easy to learn and implement, and you can really get started with DAX very quickly, right, with data analysis expressions. However, where a lot of people start to realize there's more to DAX than they ever knew is when they start to put that into visuals and they see that that total row is unexpected. They get unexpected totals because it's not the sum of the rows. And that's where you really kind of start to learn more about DAX. You go from being a beginner in DAX to intermediate because you have to start learning about filter context and understanding that the total row has its own set of filters, and that expression that you've written in DAX is actually being evaluated at the total row. And so obviously we don't have time to go through any demos here today, but if you go, I'll have Devin go to my blog at mitchellpearson.com, and I've actually done a 3-blog series around unexpected totals in DAX. And so I would definitely recommend, if that's your question or you're curious in that, to go look at that 3-blog series, start from the first one out there at mitchellpearson.com, and that'll help you out to better understand that filter context a little bit. But that's a question I get all the time.
And you cover, I believe you actually cover this in one of our classes, right?
I do. I cover it in, I believe it's the Advanced DAX course.
Okay.
Correct.
Gotcha.
Yes, sir.
So if you guys are interested in that, we'll kind of bring up occasionally where it makes sense to talk a little bit about our training. I'll point you in the right direction. So we talked about cloud versus not cloud earlier. We actually have 2 different courses covering, if you're not using the cloud, how do you administrate Power BI report server versus how you administrate Power BI service. Things like that we'll make sure to bring up if you're interested in learning more. I see actually a few people in here that are already customers of our training, so I want to make sure I can point them in the right direction.
I would just jump in real quick. So everybody on the call knows there's a lot of questions that have come in, a lot of great questions. We're obviously not going to get to all of them, but I'm actually answering a lot of them privately to individuals right now as we're going through the call. So I'm going to continue answering those. And then if we have a chance at the end, we'll bring out some more of those questions and answer them.
Were you pulling a couple of them aside too, I saw?
I was,
okay, cool.
Yeah.
All right, great. So next one I'll ask here is about, so technology, and this was from Vivek. Vivek asked the question about, more traditional BI versus Power BI. So the question he asked specifically is, when do I choose to use something like reporting services versus Power BI? If I have some reporting needs, why would I choose one versus another? So I'll address it a little bit. If you want to comment or jump in, please do. So some people ask me the question, is reporting services going away? And the answer to that is no. No, the reporting service is not going away. They do solve different problems. While they do have some crossover between them, reporting services has not only a few features that Power BI doesn't have, and vice versa. Power BI has features that SSRS doesn't have, but also in general, you're using them for different purposes. Power BI is often going to be used to design things like dashboards and graphs and gauges and maps and things like that. Whereas reporting services is more for, I would say, more operational reports where I want to see pages and pages of data, perhaps. That would be a great use case for reporting services as opposed to Power BI. If you have a need to actually see pages and pages of data returned back, you're probably not using Power BI to do that.
No. And also, if you want to care about the pixel perfect kind of reporting, it feels more like like reporting services at that point also.
Yeah.
Now Power BI is getting better and better about those little knobs you can turn to get it more refined and more template based, but it feels like Power BI still.
Yeah, and they have
reporting
service. Sorry, Power BI actually has some custom visuals now where you can have multiple pages of data. I still don't recommend doing it. What you're doing in Power BI is you're trying to design a dashboard and reports to go into that dashboard, and so they're very different solutions. They do have some interaction between them. You can actually, even today, you can pen reporting services visuals into Power BI, so there's some capabilities of doing that. And then there's also some capabilities where you can actually see, if you're using like the Power BI report server, you can publish both Power BI reports and SSRS reports to the same location. So they do kind of work together a little bit.
Yeah, I imagine those lines will get even more gray as time goes on.
I think so too, yeah. So. Wink, wink. All right. Next one I'll ask you, Brian, is this one's from Gina. So Gina asks that she says she's building a Power BI solution, and her question is, do I necessarily need to have a data warehouse to do
that's a great question.
Power BI? Yeah.
Like any consultant, it really depends. So let me just get my own example here. So we're taking data out of our CRM, which is Salesforce.com in our case, and we have a lot of issues with that. We have data that's out there from 10 years ago now. So we'll have data that is like if I want to find out my sales by state, for example, we had at one point in our evolution, we had states that were like FL and FLA and Florida fully spelled out. So we had 4 versions of Florida. So to get the real answer out of that, we needed a data warehouse or some kind of reporting layer. Now, while Power BI doesn't have to have a data warehouse, there are some examples where it does make sense, and this is an example of where it makes sense. You have dirty data, really, really crummy data. A lot of that can be cleaned with Power BI, but it's going to be, well, what about this scenario? What about this scenario? So you're constantly updating your transformations in Power BI, your queries in Power BI to handle all that. I built the standard report in Power BI there, and I had a whole bunch of case statements, a whole bunch of if then, and it became so ugly. It was like, forget about it. I'm just gonna go to the data warehouse and clean it there instead.
Yeah, and with inside of more enterprise BI tools, like if you're building a data warehouse, Microsoft's tools you have, they're not very frequently used, but things like data quality services, master data services to be able to handle that data that may already be in your system or prevent from ever happening to begin with.
And the best part about the warehouse is platform agnostic, right? So you can have reporting services for those page data reports like Devin's talked about. You can have the dashboards in here. You can have, if you want a Tableau or a Cubes or whatever you want, you can bring all those together, but you have one version of your data.
Cool, I'll leave this one, I'm gonna pass this one to you here. So this is from David. So David asked the question, besides the Power BI service, what are the ways to distribute Power BI reports or Power BI to the enterprise? What resources are there for administrators responsible for the back-end infrastructure? So it's kind of a 2-part question. Let's start for the first one here. How would you distribute Power BI to the enterprise?
Well, there's a common one in it.
What's that?
That's a common question, isn't it?
Yeah. Very common. There's really 2 options that have been provided by Microsoft. The first one is obviously Power BI service, which all the back-end database management and everything is done for you. The alternative solution to that is Power BI report server, which is your on-premises solution. And that actually is almost identical. It is identical, right, to reporting services. Right. So if you're already working with reporting services, the Power BI report server, that management portal that you get, is pretty much identical to reporting services, and the way that you configure security and the way that you set up your folders and all of that is pretty much identical. Go ahead.
Just to add to that, so to take his question a step further, I think this is what he's asking. How would I then distribute the things that I've created? So the collateral I've created in let's say the Power BI service.
Or customers or
would I use apps and things like that? Yeah.
So in the Power BI service, either you can bundle that workspace up into a Power BI app and you share it to them via email, as long as they have a Power BI Pro license. The other way that you can do that is you can actually take those dashboards and reports and you can put them directly on a web page using Power BI embedded. Okay. So that's another way of doing that. There's a third option called publish to web, but that is a public option and there's no security behind that. So if you use that option, if you guys have seen publish to web in the Power BI portal, be very careful. Ideally, your company would have already disabled that and turned that off, because anything that you publish to web, you put out there on a blog or on a website, anybody can see anything.
Can you show where that's?
Yeah, let's show that real quick. So I do have a sample data set here. It doesn't even matter what the data is that we're showing for this, but what I want to show you guys is what Mitchell just mentioned, which is how can I turn off this feature called Publish to Web. It's a little bit dangerous, he's saying. It's not a very ideal way of sharing with others because it's people could basically Google and find your data. So the better option is to frankly turn that off. And the way you can turn that off is by going underneath the admin center, which is right here. If you go underneath settings and admin portal, now not all of you will have permission to go to the admin portal. So this is actually special permissions that your Office 365 administrator will grant you, that they don't necessarily have to make you an Office 365 admin, but they do need to make you a Power BI admin for you to be able to go to this admin portal. And what's nice about this admin portal is there's a bunch of different settings in here that you can tweak and turn and twist and do all sorts of things. This is also where the organization visuals that I mentioned earlier are. So you can add individual visuals here that are available to your company. And then the thing that we're focused on for this example here is underneath tenant settings. You'll see underneath tenant settings, there's a section here where it says share content with external users. That's actually not it. The publish to web, here it is. The publish to web feature is something you can actually turn off for your entire tenant. And actually what we just noticed earlier today is they've now set this and they've made it where you can actually set it for specific groups. This used to be an all or nothing thing. Either your whole tenant had it or you didn't. But now it looks like they've actually made a change in here. We talk about Power BI changing so frequently, right?
It's daily in some cases.
Daily in some cases, yeah, especially the service. You now have the ability to specify specifically who you want to exempt from the security groups here. So you can tell it, yes, I want to disable it except for these users kind of thing. And that's one of the nice things you mentioned about our training is that we do update and make changes to it. So you'll be able to see these things actually show up in our training.
Mitch is quite frustrated because he just built this material and has to go back and re-record this now after this.
Actually, we just re-recorded the entire Power BI admin course, and so Manuel re-recorded it, and he's probably got that in there. He just did it like 2 weeks ago. Yeah, but I didn't realize they had updated that.
I had a quick question from Sanjay here also.
Okay.
So he loves the Q&A section, but what he's looking for is ways of doing like, who is my best salesperson? Who is like more like challenging questions for like linguistically.
Yeah, sure. All right, so let's hide that. Oh, it hid my camera. I'll try it one more time here.
It said we can't show your camera anymore because of your looks.
Because my looks. All right, we'll give it another try here. All right, so I'm going to go over to Power BI, and I don't have a model in here. We can go in the right direction though. Inside of the Power BI desktop, there is a section underneath the modeling ribbon. Once we go to the relationship view, so you need to go to the relationship view first. And underneath the modeling ribbon, you'll see it contextually changes when you're under the relationship view. And there's a couple things in here that you can actually use. Up in the top left, there's something called synonyms. And the idea of synonyms is where you can actually create basically like column aliases or synonyms for your column names.
So you might have customer ID, account ID.
Right.
Really the same thing in your case.
Yeah, and you want to be able to account for the different ways that people talk about your data, and you can do that with synonyms. The other thing here is on the right-hand side, it's called linguistic schema. And there's a bunch of cool things you can do with this. Part of the benefit of using this is it actually exports a file. So it'll export a linguistic schema file. And you can export that file and then hand that file off to maybe your business analyst, and they can go plug away all the synonyms that maybe you use. The other thing is you can actually do some more complicated things in there where it can understand verbiage better.
But the best.
The best. What does the best mean? How does Power BI know what it means to be the best? Or example I've used for this quite frequently is, let's say you're looking at election data and you want to know who won the election. Well, how does Power BI know what it means to win something?
Yeah.
So you can actually go in the linguistic schema and on the Power BI blog, they have a really good blog showing you how to make these different definitions.
It's a JSON file, isn't it?
It's a it's a it's like an XML file.
Okay.
Yeah. And you can actually go in there and you can kind of customize and give it more understanding of what you're asking when your data here.
That's really cool. Sanjay says thank you.
Cool. You got another question queued up first so we can go?
Oh, for me?
Yeah.
Oh man, I've been answering a bunch of them. I have one right here I was responding to called the publish to web exemption feature is premium. I do not have this available to me. And so Bill, this is a question by Bill. Bill, if you don't see that, it's actually not a premium. You should be able to see it with the pro option as well. But what happens is it's not for dashboards, it's only for reports. And so when you're looking at a report in the Power BI service, up in the top left, there's a little, I think the tab is file. And so if you click the drop down for file, it'll actually show you the option right there, publish to web. However, if you don't see that, then that's most likely because your company has already disabled that as a best practice. And that's what we tell everybody, right? When we see people, we say, hey, make sure you disable this because, you know, as an organization, one of the things we've seen with Power BI is that a lot of organizations, they were publishing reports and publishing these things up to the cloud before they really understood even the administration piece of what they were required to do as an organization. And so that's one thing that I was actually just responding to here. The other question, you can probably show this one real quick, Devin, is Syed said, in Power BI or in Excel 2016, can we create forecasting time series graph in Power BI? In other words, in 2016, they could do forecasting. Can we also do that in Power BI?
Yes. So good question. So in Power BI, you can do some forecasting. There's actually a couple different ways you can do it. If I had a model up here, we could pull this up pretty quickly. Let's see if I can.
You might still be able to see the analytics pane here if you just bring in maybe a line
that's
chart
true.
or something.
Let's see if I can just bring in a line. So it's only available right now with the line chart. So if I bring in a line chart and I had some data pinned to this, you can go underneath the analytics pane, and it doesn't look like the options are showing here, but underneath the analytics pane, there's an option for forecasting, and you can actually turn forecasting on, and you can tell it how many units into the future that you want it to forecast. So if I'm looking at my data at a month level, maybe I want to look 3 months into the future, you can specify that underneath the analytics pane and tell it that's how you want to look at it, and you also tell it the increment of your data. So if you're looking at it years, months, whatever. That's only going to be as good as the data that you have, right?
This handles seasonality too, which is kind of nice.
I can handle seasonality. And basically what it outputs is this kind of cone of where it thinks the next 3 months might look like. And it'll give you a straight line of where it thinks it could be, and then this cone of uncertainty, I guess, of where it could potentially be as well.
It's usually good about 2 to 3 months in the future, but much beyond that, it gets a little squirrely, doesn't it?
Right. And it's only, like I said, it's only as good as the data that you provide to it as well.
I think, Devin, we had another question. I don't remember where we saw it. It was right as the class was starting, so it might have been in here. There's a lot of them in here, or it might have been on the paper, but there was one around a 30-day running average.
Oh, yes. Yeah, you want to take that one?
Yeah, so I don't have the DAX immediately available for you, but if you can show them the DAX cheat sheet on our website.
I sure can.
We actually have a DAX cheat sheet on our website. It doesn't have the exact DAX for a 30-day running average, but all you would have to do is slightly modify that. And so what I do on that one is I do a dates between function, and the dates between says, okay, return all the dates between this start date and this end date. Determine the start date by using same period last year. So you would have to change that function. You wouldn't want to go to the same period last year. You just want to go back 30 days. And so what you would do there is you do a date add function. You say date add, take this date, go back 30 days. And so by using that function, you could actually very easily go back 30 days and get that as your start date. You'd use the ending date as the last date for today, and that would give you your 30 days.
Cool. Yeah, Brian, you got one?
I have a whole bunch from Mary here, but we'll start with the bottom one here first and kind of work our way up here. It says if 2 people have a pro license of Power BI, which means I guess they're on the Power BI service, can they share reports without having to have the Power BI server? Well, Mary, the Power BI server is meant for an on-premise solution. So if you have 2 people that have pro, they should be covered without having to need the Power BI server.
Yeah, so you're right. You're technically supposed to have a pro license to develop in Power BI report server, but everyone consuming from the Power BI report server, again, that's the non-cloud method. They do not necessarily need to be covered by licenses. Yep.
Right. A common one I'm seeing from a few people here is really about dashboards versus reports in general. Do you want what's the benefit if I have all these beautiful reports? Why would I want to build a dashboard?
Yeah. So best way I can describe this to you. Let me pull up.
This is from Mary also, but it kind of goes into how the logistics of how we do that. But
yeah, so here's kind of how I think about it, and here's really a strategy that I oftentimes will use for developing and building out projects, Power BI projects, is I don't try and take on everything at once, right? I try and take on things in smaller chunks. What I mean by that is if my finance department wants to build Power BI solutions, I don't say, all right, well, let's build everything for finance all at once. What I'll do is, all right, I'll say, let's tackle general ledger data, and then let's tackle accounts receivable data, and actually make these smaller individual projects where I'll start off by tackling the GL data. I'll build out a Power BI solution in Power BI desktop, create a PBIX file, publish that off to the Power BI service, and then I'll move on to the next one and create an accounts receivable one and do all the work for that. And I'll publish these separate solutions. It's all finance data, but I'll publish AR data, GL data, whatever other data I need to pull in. And then from those separate solutions, I'll create a dashboard above them. That's my finance dashboard that actually feeds in from those separate reports.
Yeah, and you might even have an executive dashboard, take some data from Salesforce, some data from the finance systems, some data from your whatever other system also. We have a lot of systems in our environment, so that one executive dashboard really comes into play.
Yeah. So keep that in mind. So your reports feed into a dashboard. So oftentimes the reports that you design look like dashboards, and a lot of people treat them that way. But you're trying to feed into a higher level dashboard that actually has multiple data sources feeding into it.
Yeah, logistically, Mary says, how do we do that? You basically, when you open up a report, you'll hit the little pin button in the top right of any report element, and that will pin it to a new dashboard or an existing one. So you can hop around to all 8 or 9 reports that you have and just hit the little pin button to do that.
Yeah, so I'm showing that on the screen right now. So this is a healthcare example as public data, where I can hit the little pen visual icon up in the top right of any one of these visuals, and that will pin it to my dashboard. In fact, if I have more than one dashboard, it'll actually prompt me and ask me which dashboard do I want to put this on. So if I had more than one dashboard, I can choose here. Another question I saw pop up in chat is around, and Mitchell, if you want to address this one here, is around moving my solutions between environments. So say, for example, I've started with, I want to have a development environment and then publish this off to production. How can you be able to, or how can you organize Power BI in a way that you can move from different environments?
Yeah, absolutely. So the best way to really do that is, and a lot of people don't know this, Microsoft has disabled this feature by default when you go into the Power Query Editor, but you have the ability of using parameters, just like you do another enterprise level tool. So you can enable, you can go into File and Options and Settings and enable parameters, and then you can create global parameters, or not, they're not global parameters, unfortunately. They don't go outside of that one Power BI report, but you can create parameters that give you a server name, a database name. You can even set up dates if you want. And then when you import the data, instead of hard coding that value and saying my server name is, 11.222.333, you say, hey, my server name comes from this parameter. And when you publish that to the service and you go to schedule that, when you go in there and you say, hey, I want to schedule a refresh in the service, you have the option of actually changing that parameter right there in the service.
Yeah.
So you can do all of your testing and development locally on your machine. You can publish it to the service and even use those default parameters in the service, but then when you're ready to run this on a schedule and maybe move that from one workspace to a published workspace, then you quickly change those parameters. So my recommendation behind that is to use parameters within the Power BI query editor.
And then it sounds like also perhaps have a development workspace, a production workspace.
Correct, exactly. And I don't know how much you guys know about workspaces in general, but what happens is when you finish developing your Power BI really reports and everything, you will publish that or save that off to a workspace in the cloud. And I like to relate that to maybe a file on your system, right? I'm just going to save that to a file in the Power BI service, and you can call that first file your development file. And then once you get done with all of your testing in the development phase, then you can take it from Power BI desktop and save it to another file in the service, which would be another workspace, and that would be your QA workspace. Unfortunately, right now, there's no way, and you correct me if this is something that came out in the last couple of weeks while I've been on vacation, but right now there's no way of copying stuff from one workspace directly to another workspace. So the only way to really move it between environments, it's clunky, is you have to actually publish it up to a workspace, test it out, and then you have to come back to Power BI desktop on-prem and then publish it to another workspace. So keep that in mind as you work through this.
There's no source control per se yet either. I mean, you can check in the PBIX files, but it has all the data, so your source server gets blown up out of portion.
I did look, by the way, Don corrected us. The linguistic file is a YAML file.
Oh, YAML file.
So, yeah. Thank you, Don, for the correction there. The next question I saw was around changes, and this is from Lazina, about changes in my data source. So the idea here being that I had a table that I'm using as a data source, and new columns were added, or actually their specific question is column names were changed. And so I'm referencing a certain data source that's using these columns, and yet the changes have occurred. What's the best way to be able to handle those changes? And so what I would recommend in that scenario is actually from within inside of Power BI, I would recommend changing and fixing those solutions by going into your query editor, of course. And I'm actually going to just launch it open here. And I'll connect to a data source here real quickly just to be able to show an example. This is fine. And what I would recommend whenever you have column names that change is that you actually go in and change them within inside of the advanced editor. The reason for that is because you can certainly change them and try and fix them here in the UI part, but unfortunately, if you change them and try and fix them here, you still have all the other elements downstream that could hurt it. So what I often do is I'll use the advanced editor up at the top here to be able to go almost do like a find and replace. What was my column name before? What is it now? And if I go underneath the advanced editor, I can see all those column names here. This is actually some of the names here. So region, month, month number. And I can go in and I can rename those here within inside of the advanced editor. Once I hit OK or done on this, it'll then populate that down through my query editor, and any of those changes will now be corrected. So it does happen. Is that fixed? The kind of clunky? Yeah, it is. But that's probably the best way to be able to deal with kind of column name changes there.
And we have a question from Letitia about like real-time analytics.
Oh, okay.
And how do we go through and ultimately, she has some machinery, it looks like, and she wants the machinery to report to Power BI.
Yeah.
But in real time, like what's the temperature of certain gauges and those kind of things. So Power BI can handle real-time analytics. Power BI service can handle real-time analytics. A number of ways you can do it. If you actually, if you have the Power BI service there, Devin, you'll see there's one of your data set options is to get live streaming. So you can attach the API. You can have your machinery or your hospital's machinery or any kind of Internet of Things type thing report over either Event Hub or Windows or Azure IoT Hub. One of those two options is your best option. Once it, I'm sorry. Once it goes into that, once it goes into IoT Hub or Event Hub, you then take all those billions of rows that you might have, and you can aggregate that a little bit into one row every 5 seconds, one every 5 minutes, whatever that number is for you that you want to move the needle in your report. That will be done with Stream Analytics inside of Azure. So Event Hub, the Stream Analytics, and Stream Analytics to Power BI. So the whole role of Stream Analytics is basically to move the needle every so many seconds when you're getting billions of rows from a smart grid or from a hospital system, or in her case, machinery. It will basically not, we don't move the grid moving up and down like crazy. You want to kind of like have a nice, slow flow into it. There is this thing called Pubnub also, which is in here as well, where you're able to bring extra data from streaming data sets also. Once you're in a dashboard, you'll see right here, there's your Stream Analytics in the middle there. You can actually go right to the API, and Pubnub is another as an external website, third-party website you can use to tap into it as well. Those are the two options.
One way I used this before too, so it's a little bit different than the machinery example, but it was still real time. I did this during the French election, so this is a year ago now. But I wanted to be able to, and the way I leveraged this, did this was through Microsoft Flow. So I used Flow to pull in tweets about the French election, and at the same time, Microsoft Flow has a translate connector, and I translated those tweets to English all kind of seamlessly and brought them into a dashboard, so I could see the tweets kind of streaming in using a data source like this and Microsoft Flow to be able to manage the translation of them as well.
Another one also that we always kind of teeing you up for your next question here also looks like is direct query. So if you want to get data directly, in real time-ish, direct query allows you to actually check the boxes inside of Power BI. It runs the queries live against the data sets, or against data sets in this case of SQL Server, Azure, whatever it might be. The availability of direct query depends on the data sources. So there are some data sources like flat files, for example, that may not have the ability to do that, but SQL Server does have that ability, and I think even Oracle and other data sources like that.
Yeah, one thing too about direct query, so there's some limitations to it that's already on the public roadmap for Microsoft that they're fixing. So one of the major downfalls, I guess, of direct query is that if you're going to do a direct query data source, then you are only doing that one source. You cannot connect to other data sources. On the public roadmap, they haven't described when that's going to happen, hopefully soon. That's going to change, where you'll actually be able to have multiple types of data sources. You could have two different direct query from two different sources, or you could have a direct query and a imported data source. That's coming probably very soon, but that's already been announced on the public roadmap that it was coming quite a while ago. So hopefully it'll be very soon.
It's one of our questions even.
Yeah. You got one queued up we can do?
Yeah, I have a question right here from Mark. Mark was saying that they're having trouble actually loading large tables and cubes into Power BI desktop. The issues are generally centered around memory, of course, because everything's getting loaded into memory. He did mention that there are about 85 million rows in a large table that they're bringing in, but even when he reduces that down to about 2 million rows, he's still getting the same error messages. And so he was asking if we could please give some advice or maybe some recommendations there. And so a couple of things that I would recommend, and you guys might have some other recommendations as well, is Power BI puts everything into memory, but a big way that it does that is It's going to get higher levels of compression because it does the compression based on a column by column basis. It's going to get higher levels of compression if you actually have less unique values in your columns. So you want to have as many columns as possible. You want those to have a lot of duplicate values. The other thing I would recommend is not necessarily look at the total number of rows that you're importing, but also look at the total number of columns.
Right. And
so a lot of times I see that we see that people are bringing in a lot of columns that they don't need. So I would recommend getting rid of as many columns as you can, and then looking at the columns that you are bringing in and see if you can make them maybe have more duplicate values, right? So something like an address, like our old address used to be 400 College Drive, Middleburg, Florida.
What are you doing?
If you put all of that information into one column, you're going to get terrible level of compression. But if you were to break that out into maybe 2 or 3 columns, where the city and state were their own column and the street was its own column, you would get much higher levels of compression in Power BI. So the things that we normally recommend is, hey, get rid of as many columns as you can that you don't need. Make sure you're doing everything you can to get rid of column uniqueness, even if you got to split those out a little bit. And then the other thing I would say is if you have 85 million rows, there's probably not much you're going to be able to do there. You might want to actually look at implementing a more enterprise level solution for this, which is the tabular model, which is very similar to Power BI. It's pretty much identical. You just use a different tool to develop that, and you would use SQL Server licensing to do that. And so that would be my recommendation.
Yeah, other band-aids, of course, a lot of people think, I have 16 gigs. Well, if it's all brand based, right? You get about 90% compression on a good day, hopefully.
Right.
And then so you're thinking, well, I have 16 gigs of RAM. Why isn't that working? Well, in many cases, we would do all these things called dashboard and day events. And we see a lot of laptops that have a lot of RAM, 8 gigs, 16 gigs, but they're running 32-bit version of Power BI. So with that, you're not actually getting all the RAM usage that you think out of your machine. So you're only getting 3 gigs in that case.
Yeah.
So that 85 million rows in his case, they'll be paging the disk and really, really slow after that. So make sure you're running a 64-bit version of Windows and Power BI, and make sure you have ample amount of memory. So 4 gigs is not going to cut it for larger data sets.
All right, cool. I'll do one here if you want to queue up the next one after this.
All right,
so Scott asked, what are different ways to control security in Power BI? If we want certain users to only see certain data or to have access to certain data, is there documentation to be able to learn more about this? Yes, so there's some good blogs, and actually the Microsoft documentation within Microsoft Docs you can find is pretty good on this, but I'll also highlight this briefly here as well, Scott. So inside of my Power BI desktop solution here, I'm gonna go ahead and bring this data in just to kind of get you a point to where to get started. And I will mention here, we also do cover this in our class as well, so you can certainly learn more about this in some of our trainings. But so I brought some data in, and if I want to actually implement some security around this, specifically row level security, where people can see certain rows or not see other rows, I can do that by going up to the modeling ribbon. And underneath modeling, you'll see there's a section here called security. And what we want to do underneath the security section is we want to manage the roles that we have. And so what we're going to do in here is we're going to select manage role and hit create. Now, creating security in Power BI is really a 2-part process. Inside of the Power BI desktop, you create the role and you define what that role has assigned to it, what rows it's allowed to see. And then when you publish this model to the Power BI service, that's when you're going to tell it what users you want to assign to the role. A couple other things that I found by accident, that when you're using things like row level security, there's some things that don't work. So things like Q&A don't work. Like it took me a while to figure that out. As of right now, it doesn't work. So that's one thing to keep in mind. But let's kind of walk you through this process here. So if I wanted to, let's say, secure this by the Northwest region or Northeast region, whatever, it doesn't matter. I'll give the role a name. So I'll call this Northeast. I'll tell it which table I want to secure, which in my case, I only have one table. I'll hit the little ellipses right here and tell it I want to add a filter on region. And the value that I want to filter this on is going to be the Northeast region. Hopefully there actually is a Northeast in this. Once you've defined that, I'll hit save. And then before I do this though, I do want to briefly describe to you, there is a much more complex way to do this. So if you wanted to make this much more dynamic, where it could read in from a table rather than me having to hard code this, that can certainly be done as well. That's all about how you design the model and the data source itself and the table that you provide. It gets deeper into probably a 45-minute conversation.
We could be a whole hour webinar on this.
I think we do.
And Mitch's a class also covers
He does,
this.
yep.
Yeah.
But that allows you to make this much more dynamic. Rather than me having to say, these users can see Northeast, you would already have that information stored in a table, and you can call those tables using DAX in here. All right, so this is the easier way, the simpler way. If I hit save, that's going to create security on this so that this particular this group only allows you to see the Northeast users. And so if I were to go ahead and build a quick report here, it doesn't really matter what I'm going to show in this example. All right, so I can see some data that I brought in. Not so concerned about what type of data it is, but you can see that there is a Northeast in here. Let me up the text size of that a little bit so we can actually see it. All right. All right, so we can see the data that I'm working with. I do have some rows that indicate that they're from the Northeast. Now, what you can do is in the Power BI desktop is if you want to test out that role to verify that it's going to do what it's supposed to, is you'll see there's an option on the top here where it says View as Role. So this is your way to test the role you just created. So if I select View as Role and tell it that I want to test the Northeast role, I can hit OK, and you can now see I'm only seeing the Northeast records. Now, again, my next step is I would take this model, deploy this off to the Power BI service, and then from the Power BI service right here, I can assign security to the data set. So in the bottom left, I would go to the data set and I would tell it that I wanted to find security on this data set right here in the bottom left. And I would be able to assign users now that are in my Azure Active Directory to individual roles. Now, you can have individuals that are part of more than one role. So what happens when someone's part of more than one role, they get the cumulative of those roles. So I would get Northeast and Southeast if I was assigned to both roles.
And can you have an AD group called Northwest, and anybody in that group gets it as well?
Yeah, that's correct. So you don't necessarily have to assign it to individual users. You can actually assign it to an AD group if you wanted to, and all those users would be implemented in there. You got one ready for us?
Time about 2 more questions, looks like.
Yeah, I think we have probably 1 or 2 more questions. We got 5 minutes left.
I do. So Jeff was saying that the licensing process in Power BI is really confusing
Fair
as
enough.
far as exactly what you can do with different licensing levels, and can we explain those in simple terms?
Okay.
And so would you like me to
Yeah, go for it, man. You picked the question.
It is very confusing.
It is
All right.
confusing. You're right.
So there's really 3 different licensing structures. You have the free version, you have the pro version, and then you have Power BI Premium. The free version allows you to take all of the work that you do, publish that up there to the service, but then you cannot share it with anybody and nobody can share it with you. So if you have the free version, there's no sharing allowed at all. That's how Microsoft makes their money. So they give you the tool for free so you can play with it, explore, see how awesome it is, right?
Personal
But then,
BI.
personal BI, really, right? You can't share it with anybody. The pro version is pretty simple as well. You have pretty much the same features with the free version and the pro version. The big difference there, the major difference is that if I have a pro license, I can publish that to a workspace in the Power BI service, not my personal workspace, but a workspace that I've created. And then I can share any of the reports and dashboards that I've created with other users. The key takeaway there is anybody I share with must also have a Power BI Pro license. So if I'm one developer and my company has 101 people and I'm going to share it with 100 other users, all 100 of those users will also have to have the Power BI Pro license. Power BI Premium kind of changes the rules a little bit. If you purchase Power BI Premium, Microsoft gives you your own dedicated server in the cloud, which has a ton of great benefits. But what it does is it actually changes licensing. And so this is where a lot of people get confused as well. For example, if you buy Power BI Premium, meaning you're paying about $5,000 a month on average to get your own server in the cloud with tons of benefits.
Yeah.
That's the low end one. This works great for larger companies, though. They actually save money by going to Power BI Premium. And this is why, because if I have Power BI Premium, I as a developer still have to have Power BI Pro. And then I will take those reports that I built and I will actually publish those directly to my now private cloud server that I've been given by Microsoft. However, then I can share that workspace and the stuff in that workspace through Power BI apps. You can share that with anybody in your organization, even if they're free users.
Okay.
So now you're not paying $9.99 a month for all those users. And so for a larger company that might have 500 users or 1,000 users, if they're only paying $9.99 a month for 100 or 50, let's say 20 developers, and they're paying that $5,000 cost, now they're saving $9.99 a month on 1,000 users.
Right.
So they actually are saving money through that structure. Most companies are going to be using Power BI Pro. Larger companies start going the route of Power BI Premium.
And so it sounds like then the person that published the app or created the app, they need to have the pro license as well. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, there's a pricing calculator out there. Let's say I have this many authors and I have this many people that want to access it, and it'll kind of give you a good pricing metric there.
Yeah.
There is. Yeah.
All right. Well, do we have any short questions we can do? We got 2 minutes here.
Let's see.
We have a ton of questions.
I've answered a lot of them. So there's one more we'll answer real quick. This is from Bruna. Bruna said, is there any situation when it is very good to use parameters?
Okay.
So coming from a development background, one of the problems I had, I was working for a client in Africa for a couple of years, and we would have just these situations where servers and infrastructure hardware would just crash. And all of a sudden we'd have to move all of our work from one server to another server. And we would always parameterize the server name and the database name so that if it ever changed from an administrative perspective, it would be really easy to change. And so I would always recommend actually parameterizing the server name. If you're connecting to this server on this machine, I would recommend using parameters to parameterize that server name, because if you ever have to change it in the future, you can do it right there in the service very quickly by just going down your jobs and just changing those parameters. If you haven't parameterized that, you would have to go back through all of the Power BI reports that have been published. You'd have to open them back up on your on-prem machine. You'd have to go into that. You'd have to go into the settings. You'd have to change it there. And then you would have to publish that back up to the cloud. And so it would take a lot more time, and there'd be a lot more administration behind that. There's really a lot of different great scenarios for using parameters. So that's the first one I think of.
What comes to mind is kind of your thought there made me think of this as like a multi-tenant situation where your company actually builds things for multiple customers. So you have a Power BI solution that you've designed for healthcare, and then you've had a bunch of customers now buy that solution. So if you parameterize it, you can then plug in their data source and swap out with another one very easily.
It's real. See those parameters also. So if you did have to do that, right down here, questions are in the way there. There's one place you can actually do it also, is in managing your data sets.
Yeah, and one thing too so you brought up Power BI Premium earlier, and you gave the perfect reason for what Power BI Premium is designed for. Power BI Premium is you get your own dedicated resources in the cloud. So that way, you're not on a shared resource where someone else could run this really nasty query that actually affects you in some way. Yeah. But they've really taken Power BI Premium and they've made it where all these other features are tied to it that have nothing to do with that, which is kind of interesting to get you looped into what Premium does. But no, very, very interesting. All right, guys. Well, I think we are out of time. That went really fast. We are collecting these questions. What we'll probably try and do is actually do some kind of follow-up blog to address as many of them as possible. And I do want to thank you guys for joining us. If you like this, please let us know. Share it on Twitter. Tag us. Let others know that you enjoyed the session. And that way, maybe we need to do this on a more frequent basis. We'd love to hear back from you. So with that, I want to thank you guys. I'll let you say something as well, but thank you for joining us.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it. You guys have a good day. Have a good week.
Thanks.
All right, awesome, everybody. I just want to let you guys know this will be previously recorded, and you guys will receive an email link to you guys' email tomorrow. So just look out for that. And like they said, thank you guys for joining the webinar. And there will be a recording on the website as well as an email sent out to you guys tomorrow. Thanks so much. Bye.